Yes.
Oh, hi, Carine. It's
Hi,
so
nice to
wonderful.
meet you all.
Yeah, it's
Ah, nice
wonderful.
to
I mean,
see you.
what?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm actually well awake. So
Oh my
Wow,
God, what time is
that's
it
wonderful.
there?
it's 3 a.m.
And are
Wow,
you
are you in
in?
Luxembourg or are you in France?
I am in France, but actually I live like 5 kilometers from the border. So it's a bit cheating, isn't it? I'm in between.
Nice, nice, very nice. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for doing this. This is amazing. You're such a sport.
Well, thanks for
Yeah,
inviting me. That's really such a pleasure.
So Shafan,
yeah,
did you want to introduce Carine with a few words about her?
yeah, yes. So I'm so thrilled to have her here as a speaker for UXP Seattle, and so wonderful that she's awake at 3 a.m. It's just amazing how she's thrilled. I mean, excited as a speaker for us, and actually thankful. I feel thankful for that. So let me introduce her a little bit. I'm going to read the scripture a little bit. Dr. Lallemand, Carine Lallemand, is an assistant professor of design at the Eindhoven University. Did I say right? And Eindhoven University of Technology in Netherlands. And excuse me if I don't pronounce it right. Well, the University of Luxembourg, and she has a background in psychology and HCI. Her research activities are mainly focused on user experience design and the evolution method, as well as designing for behavior changes. So Carine is the author of a textbook on UX methods, currently used in more than 100 curriculums in 6 French-speaking countries. She is also a passionate advocate for academia-industry relationships. And let's welcome Dr. Carine Lallemand.
Thank you so much for
Welcome,
the
Carine.
introduction. That was amazing. As you could see, I had a slide for that and you just nailed it. So you exactly said what was on my slide. And I guess the only thing you didn't say was the tiny balloon up there, which is very close to my heart. Because besides loving UX, I also love to go and fly away and to explore
Yeah.
some things from my balloon. Also, something that I might want to mention to everyone, and first of all, good evening, everyone, I guess, for most of you. I am an academic, but it's perhaps unusual to say that I have always been very close to the industry. And I used to be actually a former vice president of the French UXPA chapter. So I know UXPA quite well. And what I noticed during the past years is that scientists in UX or HCI are developing a lot of new methods and tools. And, there is a lot going on, but unfortunately, there is not much that actually, like connects industry and academia, meaning that there are so many tools that get developed in both worlds, but do not, get shared between those worlds. So like roughly 10 years ago, I kind of turned into an ambassador and I decided to share, to be that kind of scientist that's going to talk and share knowledge with the industry. So that's what I'm doing.
That's wonderful.
So
Thank you.
there are two things that are very important when you're doing user research. The first one is to be able to select the right methods to study something and to improve a product or a system. And the second one is to be able to apply the methods that you have selected in the right way. And there are unfortunately not a lot of recipe, but a lot of good practices. So for the first point, when you think about selecting the right methods, you need to have a toolbox in the first place, right? You can only select a method when you have, a couple of them in your toolbox that you are mastering and you're comfortable with. And often, especially in industry, we don't have as much time as we want to, and we also don't have as much budget as we want to. So there is a definite need for methods that will allow you to collect rich insights but also in a very efficient way. So that's not too costly. And that is hopefully the exact requirements that the method I'm presenting tonight are going to fulfill. So we will start with a quick warm-up exercise to dive into the methods immediately. And I see that we have now 30 participants, so I guess everyone has joined. It has nothing to do with ballooning. I just thought it was a nice picture to, get in the mood. In this exercise, I will display some sentences on the screen, and I will ask you to please complete those sentences with the first idea that will come to your mind, and to type the reply in the chat so that everyone can see. I advise you to first think of your answer before looking at what other people are typing. Otherwise, you're going to get overwhelmed, but you're also going to get biased. So please just look at the sentence, think about what you want to answer, and then type it in the chat before looking at what other people say. Also, try to be spontaneous. Do not overthink. There is no right or wrong answer to those questions. So just take it easy. Okay, let's get started. So according to me, an online workshop should, and I can't see the chat, so that's going to be a discovery for later on. Okay, I see that almost everyone is done. Let's move on to the next one. I would be positively surprised by an online workshop that So I would be positively surprised by an online workshop that. Okay, I think almost everyone is done. A few extra seconds for the ones who want to be creative. All right, next question. I would feel bored from attending a workshop that. Next one. A bit harder, I guess. The most original format for an online workshop I could think of would be. you can go crazy. It doesn't have to be feasible. Next one. That's the last one. The most memorable online talk or workshop I ever attended was... All right. So what you have just experienced is part of a method called sentence completion. And basically, as easy as it is, it consists of incomplete sentences, which are given to respondents to fill in the missing words. So it's a bit like fill in the blank. You might have had this also in language classes or, some other form of courses. So this method was originally used in psychology, and it was actually used more than a century ago, especially for intelligence tests. So for instance, by the famous psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus, but also then in the context of personality assessment and even recruitment processes. And what is interesting, though, is that the sentence completion technique happens to be a very powerful and cost-effective way to collect and explore users' needs or to evaluate systems, product, or services. And in the end, it feels so simple that we might even wonder, like, is that even a valid method? What are we going to do with this? So I'm going to try to explain to you how this method makes a difference. 4 years ago, I was actually honored to give the opening keynote at the UXPA conference. And to prepare my keynote talk, I decided to practice what I preach. So I decided to apply a set of UX methods in order to find out what were the needs, the drives, the frustrations, perhaps, of my target audience. So my goal was really to design an experience of my talk in the same way I would design the experience of a product, for instance. So the only difference being that my users were in the end my attendees, so the people attending my talk. And among these methods, I started by using the sentence completion method with almost the same questions that you just answered. And if you're interested, you can later on listen to a sort of compilation of the answers that is present in the video. And if you look at these sentences again in the end and the replies that we have in the chat that I don't see yet, what you realize is that it's much more attractive or much more engaging somehow than open-ended questions. So if you would have we all have been filling out a lot of surveys in our life. And whenever you have these open-ended questions about sometimes very intimidating, abstract concepts, you just don't feel like answering those. It just feels like too much of a burden to do it. So in the end, we need to find ways to collect data in, like in an efficient fashion, where people feel like they can express rich things about their experiences or rich things about a specific topic without having the burden to fill out some very, annoying surveys. In one of my most spectacular data collection using the sentence completion method, we collected 14,000 ideas in 2 weeks by including sentence completion task within an online survey. So it was about ebooks and e-reading experience. And obviously that's quite an attractive topic with quite a broad audience. So it's, it's not only due to the method, the success of the data collection, but we really realized that the method was making a difference. So here you can see the unfinished sentences that we have used in this survey to explore the experience of electronic books, especially as compared to paper or print, to print books. And we really wanted to know a lot of things about them, but in a broad fashion. So what we first did is we tried to define some dimensions that were of interest to us. For instance, what were people's expectations? If they did not like ebooks specifically, what were the obstacles to make them switch to ebooks? For the people who were already some users of ebooks, we wanted to understand the positive aspects, the negative aspects, the issues, the frustrations, and so on. So for each of those dimensions, we actually defined some sentences, actually beginning of sentences, which we call sentence stems in psychology. And the good thing is that in this method, you can really have a lot of freedom for the respondents. So it's not like a multiple choice questionnaire where people are just, stuck in the answer options that you have defined beforehand for them. So there is a lot of freedom, which helps the people to express their deep feelings and to give you some more insights. But on the other hand, you can also steer the answer in a specific way. So if you look, for instance, at the question, I find that the interface of an ebook is, you realize that you've been steering the person to tell you about the interface, obviously. Or when you make a comparison, like compared with a print book, an ebook is, you're also steering some form of, emotional response on how those two artifacts are comparing. So basically, you can still trigger a lot of, all the dimensions that you would like to know of, but by using those sentences. You can also collect data about expectations and needs. And even if you look at the last sentence here about people's dream. So we decided to also include in the survey some sentences that were a bit more original, let's say. And we asked people, I dream of an ebook that. And the fun thing with those kind of sentences is you're going to collect a lower response rate because it's slightly more original. So some people are just going to be like, yeah, I'm not sure, it's a bit too out of the box for me. But the answers that you are going to collect are going to be more novel, more original somehow than for the other sentence stems. We also had people that just answer, I'm sorry, guys, I don't dream of ebooks. I have other things that I prefer to dream of. But that was interesting to see how those different sentences were triggering different type of information and how this information could be used in a design process. So we really realized that first of all, there was a higher response rate as compared to normal surveys that we would have done in the past. But there was also some richness in the data that was quite equivalent to what we would have collected through interviews. And we actually compared our study with previous studies on ebooks using a different set of method. And we realized that we were covering almost all the findings that people had via those enormous surveys done by the publishers, but also via user testing and interviewing to some extent. So here you can see examples. If I say the problem with ebooks is, we had more than 15 different category of answers to that question, some of them being kind of known problems, but some of them being way more original, so that's also a material that designers can work with. And literally the answers look like what you see here on the right side of the screen. So they look like verbatims. It's a bit like, you would have already some kind of clean data from interviews where you don't have the noise, but you just have this useful piece of information. So for instance, a common complaint about ebook was that we cannot physically track the progress in an ebook. And this was perceived as both disturbing from a usability point of view, but also less motivating. So that was like a factor of disengagement when you read a book. Some participants also talked about their frustration not to see people's book cover anymore. So it appeared that many people liked to spy on other people, especially in public transportation. And so they considered the book cover as a way to also showcase their identity, potentially to say, you know, like, I'm reading books about philosophy in the subway. So there were all kind of aspects that actually disappeared when switching from print books to ebooks. But there were also all kind of aspects that were more pragmatic. You could, you know, transport an entire bookshelf in your bag, or those kind of things. And so the way the results of this survey were presented, so this very insightful qualitative material allowed us to do later on some co-creation session and to really work on some of those problems to generate innovative ideas. And that's not something we could have done really with just a traditional multiple choice survey, because in that case, we would just merely have, you know, learn how many people would, you know, express something that a problem that was already known to us. So before we get to the hands-on part, where all of you will have to work a bit, let's talk about what are the strengths of the sentence completion method. So I already said it, but it is less time-consuming than an interview. Of course, if you would like to interview 100 people, that would take way too long, but you can survey 100 people using sentence completion quite easily. It is more insightful than a multiple choice survey, and it is more engaging and fun for the respondents than open-ended questions. So you have a higher response rate usually. In the case of our ebook survey, what we also realized is that people were sharing the link to the survey, and they were kind of saying, oh, it's a fun survey, you could do it too. And that never happens with a normal survey. You know, it's very hard to just get some respondent. So having people sharing it is just, you know, so that was a good sign. On the method itself, the way it works, the respondents are using their own words to describe a situation or an experience, and it is thus considered more spontaneous and more honest answers as compared to traditional questionnaires, or as compared to standardized questionnaire, where basically it's not their vocabulary, so it's not really the way they would express an experience. The sentence completion method can also overcome the limitations of standardized questionnaires. So it does not constrain the user by predefined vocabulary. So if you're using any standardized questionnaire, sometimes you have questions that people don't feel relate to them. Really, they are like, oh, okay, but they have to answer them anyway. But in this case, you really have the words and the feelings of the participants in the way they want to express it. And as I said already, it's a super open method, but you have the possibility to steer the answer by making your sentence stems more or less specific. And so the goal of today's activity is going to be to teach you, or to see together, how to create the best sentence stems and what are the different options in order to create those sentences. So how do we concretely do this? Let's try to learn by doing. So I'm going to give you this small mission here today. So let's imagine that your design team has been commissioned to design an innovative dashboard to support collaboration experiences at work. So basically, you want to create a system that visualizes something about collaboration that team members could look at and try to reflect on, or try to improve their collaboration. And when I say something, that could be, of course, some metrics about performance of the team, but it can be other factors, because we, of course, know that collaboration experience is not only a matter of performance. I can be very effective within a team while not being very happy or being very frustrated with team members. So there are way more feelings about, collaboration than just the performance of the team. But performance might be one important aspect, nevertheless. So you've been asked to design that form of dashboard. And of course, as a user researcher, you first want to understand what collaboration experience entails, right? Yeah, I mean, when you're given the topic, you always want to do some research. Otherwise, you might not know what to showcase on this dashboard. You have to come up with some form of metrics, some form of data, some form of ways to showcase it, perhaps, or moments that the data should be displayed to the team. So you might ask yourself, okay, what is a meaningful collaboration experience? What are the factors that contribute positively or negatively to collaboration experience? What are the qualities of good team players, or on the contrary, behaviors that are considered undesirable at work? All those kind of things are things that you might want to explore as a user researcher. Okay, so the way you're going to explore this is by creating sentences that your target users, so office workers working in a team, will reply to. So you're going to use the sentence completion method to kind of have a feeling for, you know, how you can design your dashboard. Is it clear so far? And now I can see the chat now. So if you have any question about the scope of the mission, or if you already think, yeah, is that thing out of scope, or what does she mean by collaboration, those kind of things, please put them in the chat right now. Otherwise, I will give you a link to a Google form. And in this Google form, you can start brainstorming some of your sentence stems. And please be aware that you're gonna be able to see the sentence stems of everyone. So everyone is gonna be able to see yours as well. I don't think it's big secret, but if you feel like something is secret, do not put it online. But the interest of this exercise is that we can visualize and we can compare the different ways all of you have been constructing those sentence stems, and we can reflect on them as a group.
Hi, Carine. There are two questions in the chat. So can you read the chat to answer the question?
Yeah. So I read the chat. Can you repeat to whom are we asking the question? So in your mission, you're designing something for team members. So imagine office workers. So you will, it's a bit like you would do an interview guide for those office workers, but in that sense, you're not doing an interview, you're doing sentence completion. So you want to understand what office workers need to reflect and to improve their collaboration, by the way. So those are your target users, office workers, working as a team. What is the data for showing that the sentence completion has a higher response rate? That's a very good one. So there are a couple of studies in psychology, and there are also our own studies, and the way, the data we collected in the short way. So there are a couple of studies in the literature, not so much experimental ones. So comparing, for instance, directly comparing a normal survey and sentence completion survey. But there are a couple of study that I could put in the reference when I share my slides, because I guess my slides are going to be shared at one point. Is there a time limit for the survey? How many researchers works on it? So you are going to design the survey, and yes, there is a time limit because this conference has to end at one point. So there is two. If you go to the survey, you will see there are two parts. In the first part, you have to first define what are the dimensions of interest for the mission that I gave you. And in the second part, you're going to have to actually brainstorm and generate some sentence stems. So for the first part, we're going to have roughly 10 minutes. And then for the second part, again, roughly 10 minutes. But I expect that the first part might be slightly shorter. Let's see. So I will come back. I see more questions in the chat about the method. I will come back to some of those questions right after the exercise, because then we will debrief and we will give best practices, and we will talk about biases, and we will talk about those different aspects. But thanks for the question. I'm writing them down, so if you come up with questions, you can also ask them now, and I will answer them later. And I will stop sharing that for a moment so I can share later on the answers, the replies that you have. So once you are done with the first part, the what do you want to know, we will just make a small debriefing all together to see if we are kind of aligned with what, you know, needs to be asked to those people. And then only, so you keep your questionnaire on hold, you don't have to validate yet, but just keep your answers. And then we will go through the next session that is called create your sentence stems. That one you can, don't do it now. And just so we can comment on the first one.
Carine, I think there's not any questions in the chat. Can you read it?
Check. That's a very good question, Veronica. So yes, there are sentences that could start with a blank. It is harder for users sometimes, but for instance, you might start with a blank and then say, is what I value the most in collaboration, you know, and then you have the blank at the start. And there are even, you will see later on, there are even sentences where you could have two blanks. So for instance, when I collaborate, I feel because, and then usually the second blank is kind of an explanation of the first one. So it's not a dumb question. It's actually a very insightful question.
No, that's great. I was just wondering because I was worried that it was too much of a constraint. You know, like I was like, oh, does it turn into constraining someone's thinking because you've kind of defined the ending? So I was really curious.
No, you can, it's very good to pilot test. In my experience, as I said, it's slightly harder for people because it can be a bit intimidating that there is, you know, the first word is like not there. So you're like, what should I do with this? And I think people are just more used to complete the end of a sentence. Also because it feels a bit like, that's a bit human-like to actually complete something that is incomplete, you know? So when you just have something that comes to your mind when the blank is at the end. But it can be quite smart also in terms of introducing some variety to have the blank at the start.
Thanks so much.
So, what elements would you like to collect to be the great designer of this collaboration dashboard? What do you need to know? Does someone want to share? You can just turn on your mic or share in the chat. Both works fine.
Can you
So you need
repeat
those.
your question?
Yeah. Do we have another one? Oh, yeah. So Elizabeth wrote down, she wants to know the value of collaboration, the purpose of collaboration, the frustrations and the pain points, the effect or sentiment from good collaboration, the qualities of good collaborators, and the qualities of bad collaborators. Yes, that's already a very good list. Do we have other lists? And as I said, there is also no right or wrong, so don't be afraid. And you could do the same, actually, you could do the same list if you would want to come up with an interview guide. You would just first think about, okay, what questions, what dimensions, what questions do we want to ask? So it's the exact same start. You just wonder, okay, what do I need to know? What would, enlighten me about this topic? Anushi, whether prefer to work solo or in a group, the aspect of group work that they do like, how they expect collaborators to behave when working together, the factors that are important to them when working in a group, a positive experience when collaborating in a group, and a negative experience when collaborating in a group. I very much like your two last ones because they seem to trigger some storytelling. So where people are going to give you a concrete example, which very often is interesting because it goes a bit beyond the cliche idea and the social desirability things around a good collaboration. Kylie, how does the team collaborate now? What the team likes or dislikes on how they collaborate as a team? What is the easiest way to collaborate and what qualifies someone as a good team player? Yeah, so Kylie is way more in the current practices. So she starts from what happens now and she tries to kind of reflect on where the team would perhaps want to go. So that's also a very good one. So once you will have all your dimension, if I will comment if I see more. The mission now is, of course, that you will have to turn them into sentence stems. You will have to create those beginning of sentences, or for Veronica, perhaps you will have to create the end of the sentences and leave the blank at the start. So for each of the dimensions that you have thought of, and you see that in the survey, I was trying to help you out a bit, and I hinted at some dimensions that you can think of. Take them as a guide. If you prefer your dimension, you can just generate your own sentences on your dimension. None of the answers are defined as, they are all optional, so you will be able to validate your survey anyhow. So now please go to the third part of the survey that is called Create Your Sentence Stems, and try to generate at least one, but if you have more ideas, just brainstorm, put them there. They don't have to be perfect. Absolutely do not aim for perfection here. Just aim for kind of a number of different sentences to express the same thing. And so try to add sentences for the different dimensions that I mentioned, but you can also, as I said, just be free to transform your own question into sentence stems and put them anywhere. It doesn't really matter. We will just read them out, a couple of them later. So I'm going to leave you roughly 10 minutes for that. So So once you're done with most of the sentences, or as much as you can or feel like writing down, you can just click on validating to validate your answers. And I will share my screen so that we can have a look at everyone's reply. Three more minutes. So even if you're not entirely done, just submit whatever you have. And so we can have a look now, and I'm going to share the screen with the answers. All right, so now we can see, and you probably can see it as well. If you click on see previous replies, then you can see everyone's reply exactly on the same screen that I have. How did it feel? How hard was it? On a scale from 1 to 5, when 1 is easy and 5 is hard. Yeah, it's not that easy at first. Okay, I have to say, this is not the easiest topic. If I would have asked you to generate sentences to evaluate, I don't know, a product, a website, etc., might have been way easier. But there is a trick to it. Actually, you could reuse, or you could get inspired by sentences that were previously used in some studies, or you could actually, the sentences that you have all generated now, we could just curate and get the best ones and help people out creating those sentence stems by giving them that as a source of inspiration. But it's indeed not so easy, and it really depends on how you're doing it and what is the topic around it, and you get used more and more than to developing those sentences. Very important in the method is to pilot test those sentences, because of course, when you create the sentence, you have a dimension in mind. You have something that you hope to trigger. So when, for instance, we hope to trigger the context. And as any type of methods in our field, we always want to pilot test. So we will pilot test. I'm going to read out loud a couple of those sentences, just 3 or 4. Let's see. And I'm going to ask you again to answer in the chat. Okay? So let's start easy here. Good collaboration means very nice. Leaving a few more seconds for the ones who are not done. So good collaboration means for those who are done, in the 30 seconds that we are going to wait for those who are not done, you could try to push yourself in answering it again with another idea and see if you come up with something else. Perfect. Okay, let's move on to another sentence. Thanks for the answers. As you can see, there is a lot of variety. So people say good collaboration means shared workload. It means successful end goal. It means efficiency. Everyone knows what they are doing. Clear communication, working well together, getting good work done, everyone being open-minded. So you see that in one single easy question, in a way, you kind of trigger all those dimensions of what matters to people to collaborate. You don't get so much details about why it matters or anecdotes about, like when this went wrong, but that, can come with additional sentence stems. So let's try another one. I work best when my team helps me I work best when my team helps me All right, that's a good one. We can have some variety. I'm going to give you one, and you'll see the fact that the blank is positioned in the middle of the sentence is probably going to make your answer way shorter, or at least probably one word. So the sentence is, I want my collaborator to feel when they collaborate with me. So I want my collaborator to feel, then there's the blank, when they collaborate with me. So you see what we see here is that the position, the location of the blank within the sentence changes also the length of the answer, because now it kind of really triggers a single word. For you as user researcher, that might be interesting because sometimes you just want to know one thing about your product. So let's imagine you design a product and you want that product to be fun. And you would design one sentence, and in that one sentence, you prompt people to tell you something about that product, and you hope that the majority of your users will describe it as fun rather than boring or beautiful or whatever. So you want to check sometimes that your design intent has been, translated into an actual experience, and might be very useful to use those sentences that trigger only a single word, because you might not want to analyze a lot of qualitative data in the end. So we will now try one slightly harder that has two blanks. So measuring blank aspect of collaboration would be helpful because blank. I typed it in the chat so you can see it. So measuring something about collaboration would be helpful because So it's very interesting on that one. So it was harder, of course, and you can still take a few seconds while to answer it if you're not done. It's very interesting because most of you did answer something very different. We have efficiency that comes back a bit more often, but all the rest is very specific, very unique, and somehow very personal as well. And yes, the sentence is harder to understand or harder to process as a respondent, but there you see how it triggers something different. Okay, we will do a last one. Trying to check which one has the most interesting structure. Oh, that's a hard one. There are a couple of original ones, like if collaboration was an ice cream flavor, it would be. Actually, if you would ask that one without asking because, then you will get a lot of whatever, vanilla or, chocolate, but you would not know what vanilla or chocolate or anything else would mean to people, like what does it mean for people? So I think whenever you're doing or using a form of metaphor, like this one, if collaboration was an ice cream flavor, you probably need the because. Otherwise, you don't know, what the meaning is, and you can go tell your client that everyone would like vanilla flavor to their collaboration. I'm not sure that's really helpful. Let's do we have a negative one somewhere? Let's go for thanks for the vanilla. Thanks for the ice cream taste. That's great. Let's do this one. It is difficult to collaborate when, and here we are triggering contextual knowledge, which is very important because collaboration within a team can just, can be great at some moments or in some specific situation or specific places or whatever, but sometimes be more difficult. All right, very nice. I think that was a very nice overview. I'm going to go back to my slides. Yep. Oh, I'm not sure I'm sharing the slides yet. No. Let's start over again. Okay, so let's do a short debriefing. Do you have any, before I comment, do you have any insights? What did you potentially learn by writing those sentences and also by actually answering to some of those sentences? Are there some things that just pop up to your mind and you're like, ah, yeah, you know, that's great or that's not so great about the method? Georgia has a very important, yeah. So Georgia asked, it's off topic, but has anyone found an effective tool for efficiently coding or analyzing a lot of open-ended data? Well, I have scientific tools that are not very efficient so far. I guess it's also about the format of this open-ended data. In my experience, for instance, the data collected through the sentence completion is slightly less complex to analyze. But of course, if you would have, you know, 14,000 answers like we did in the ebook study, that's just messy. Anushi says to think through intent of question and whether it translates appropriately to the participants. That's very important, yes. It adds a qualitative flavor to surveys in a way that seems bite-sized enough to enter. Indeed, I think that's one of the good quality of it. Did any one of you, by the way, have heard of the method before? Or is it something that you're just discovering now? Did you ever have seen like a survey using sentence completion before? New method. Yeah, someone has seen it in public health. Someone has seen it but can't remember where. And most of you like are discovering it. Okay, cool. I'm gonna tell you a few things like good practices in the couple of minutes that we have left. And I'm also kind of monitoring the chat as much as I can. So if you have questions, please ask. So very often people ask, yeah, how many sentences do we need? Like if I do a survey with sentence to complete, how many should I include in there? It's just like an interview or any normal survey. There is no predefined number of sentences actually. So it really depends on the objective of your evaluation, on the context. You know, if you reward your participant or not, if you're putting that online just as a volunteering sample, or if you put that on a crowdsourcing platform, for instance. So it really depends. There are some studies that use only 2 or 3 sentences. You could also use them at the start of a workshop as a kind of warm-up activity or icebreaker activity so that people kind of start thinking about the topic of your workshop. And some other studies, especially in academia, would go up to 30, 40, 50, I think, sentence stems. But that's really, really tough. And there is just a moment people are a bit tired. So I think now together we have, you guys have answered something like 5, probably. And you can see that some of them are just slightly more tiring than others. I personally would recommend something around 6 to 8 per participant. And especially, well, it depends if you put them in different chunks in different parts of your evaluation. But otherwise, if you have more than 6 to 8, one after the other, it might start to be a bit boring and also will, you know, demotivate. But you could also mix them with other form of questions. Which dimension can you explore? That is something that we have seen through the exercise. So you are free to define the dimensions to explore depending on your study, but it's very important that you define them beforehand so that you don't just start writing, you know, random questions. You want to be able to control the intention in your questions, and then when you will pilot test them, you will feel if the intention is there. So for instance, there might be sometimes you expect a great detailed answer with kind of a bit of storyline, and then you pilot test the question and actually people always give you one word and you're disappointed. You're like, okay, that's not what I want. So you might, you know, try some variation in the way you construct your sentence so that you trigger something longer. So we could see here by pilot testing together 5 of them, that they really, depending on their construction, depending on where the blank is and how many blanks they are, they really are triggering different things. You could use former studies as a source of inspiration, so you could kind of copy some sentence stems from former studies. Of course, you will have to adapt them to your own, and as I said, to pilot test them always. You can also use branching to create different stems for different profiles of users. So exactly like any normal survey or interview, if you survey some users versus non-users, they might not have the same questions. Otherwise, the stem will not make sense for some of them. And here on in the sidebar on my slide, I just added for you a couple of dimensions that you might want to think of, but it's just, those are just examples. Are there variations in sentence stems? And we have seen a couple of them already, and I had some questions already about them. So first of all, there are not many experimental studies in academia, in UX design specifically, or HCI specifically, about this method. So the method has been around for the last 10 years or so, but it's also not been studied methodologically like psychologists would do, But there are some worthwhile findings from psychology or for the few studies that we have. So for instance, the length of the stem. So the longer the stem, the longer the beginning of the sentence you provide, the more the participant is steered to a certain dimension, of course. So you get more specific answers. You might also switch between the first person or the third person perspective. And if you use a first person perspective, so for instance, my experience with collaboration is, then you will trigger something way more personal than if you would say, people usually like to collaborate when, and then it's people, so it's not you. So then you will trigger something that is either more generic, more cliche, or sometimes it's very smart to do that when you want to avoid some social desirability biases. So for instance, there was one study where they asked smokers how they felt about smoking, and so they did an interview, and during the interview the smokers were kind of saying, yeah, I feel good about myself, it doesn't matter, this is my choice that I'm smoking. And yeah, so they were kind of rather positive about smoking. But then they used the sentence completion, and they used sentences such as, people who smoke tend to be, and then a majority of those smokers suddenly expressed that people who do not smoke, people who do not smoke tend to be, and then the majority of answers were like happier, more relaxed, less, less dependent. So suddenly you could realize that the smokers were having nevertheless a better opinion of people who do not smoke. So there was this, this gap between the interview where you want to just, look good and pretend that you're okay with your own behavior, and then the anonymous survey using sentence completion. We didn't talk about the instructions. Today I ask you to mostly answer spontaneously, but there is sort of contradicting evidence in the literature where some authors just say it could be better to ask people to think carefully, because sometimes the spontaneous idea is not actually what matters to you the most, but just, the kind of cliche thing that comes to your mind first, but it might not be very personal. So it might be better to think carefully. But as I said, there is no right or wrong answer there. We did not find out the truth yet. Then a couple of just 2 slides about inspirations for your STEM and how to think about them. So you could prompt very generic dimensions, such as collaboration is good when, and then you're very broad, you're very generic. Or you could prompt very precise dimensions, like we have seen, for instance, when answering the metrics question in our example. And of course, I would advise to have a generic dimension first as a kind of scaffolding onboarding question, so that people are just getting used to the topic and start thinking about it, and then moving on to more specific questions that are usually way more interesting for you, because the questions that are too generic, they just cover some kind of common knowledge. You might want to use comparative stems, so you might want to compare things. So in the case of the ebooks, it's very smart to compare it with print books, so that you get, whenever you have the analog equivalent of that experience, It's very smart to do so. You can also compare different versions of a product. You can compare a product with competitors. You can compare different things. Usually it gets easier for people because it's an easy way to kind of trigger their experience. You should not be afraid of using redundant items. So what I mean is that you would create several items on the same dimension. So for instance, in the ebook survey, we had first one question that says, the problem with ebook is, and then we had another question that was triggering the same dimension, slightly more on the emotional side, but still the problem dimension. What frustrates me the most with ebooks is, and you could say, you could be like, okay, let's choose one over the other because we already have one tackling the problems, so it's enough. But actually what we realized is that we had 63% of the cases, the second question led to another answer. So people were actually not saying the same, they were telling you about another problem. So whenever you think that there is a dimension that is specifically that is very interesting, or that people might have several opinions about, or several things, then you should not be too afraid of having two dimensions that are closely related. That's entirely okay. We already mentioned the two blank stem, which is when you have, for instance, because. So you have a first blank and then you have because. Very often we put two blanks to have an explanation. As I said with the ice cream, if you would know that people prefer vanilla ice cream, you would not. It doesn't say much, but if you ask why, then it starts to explain. Then we have this last category where I ask you to find an item that would be slightly more creative. So some people played on the metaphor of ice cream. Some people played on a magic wand. If I had a magic wand to improve something, that's a good idea because it kind of pushes people to be slightly more innovative in their answers. You can also use futuristic vision. In 20 years, online banking would be. You can also compare something with the past situation. Like collaboration nowadays is much better than 20 years ago because those items really make a difference. They also kind of give like a nice, engaging, fun flavor to your survey. Then you can also make some word associations. So you could ask people the first word or the first words that comes to their mind when thinking about collaboration. So you can also try, for instance, to trigger some the brand image of a product, for instance, by asking which words are related to the brand. And you could also try to trigger some storytelling so that you would get some slightly more detailed answer, more personal answer, by asking people, for instance, I've seen it in the answer, in the replies before, about what is their worst collaboration experience or their best collaboration experience. So to try to trigger memories, or I remember of a collaboration experience that was dramatic because, so it's a very good practice as well. And I think we are running out of time, and I was trying to be on time. Do we have more questions? And I remember the question about biases that I've seen before, and I promised I would answer. Yes, the sentence completion, if you include them in a survey, they are also, they might be having the same biases as a normal survey. So anything that is related to the sequence, for instance. So if you put a very specific sentence stem first, then what comes next might be, like anchored, might be still biased by the previous answer. You have also fatigue biases. You might want to actually randomize the question if you want to avoid those, both the fatigue and the biases of sequence, like different effects. Where can we learn more about the methods? So as I said, there is unfortunately not much in our field, but there are a couple of papers. I'm sorry that I don't have anything more digestible for you guys. There is also a chapter in my book for people who speak French, but I think that's not the majority in there. But I can send you some resources about this. Cassie asked, how many participants do you aim for? You would be rather on the side of a survey. than an interview, because you can afford it, because it's kind of super easy to collect the data. So the data collection is super fast. But of course, you have to take into account that if you collect 200 replies, you will have to analyze 200 replies. So that, you know, there is still the data analysis part to think of. But I would rather say that you want, you can allow yourself to have more participants than an interview. So anything more than 30, 40, 50 is definitely affordable. Is my book going to be translated to English? Well, that was planned already before Corona, and then Corona hit. Yeah, that's still a plan. Actually, my book is very easily to, you know, if you Google translate chapters, because it's just a rather technical book, so there is no hard part. I have some colleagues in the Netherlands that are using my book just by Google translating chapters. But yeah, that's expected. Any differences between adults and children responses? That's a very good one, because I had the idea, actually 2 years ago, I tested the method with kids for the first time, and I had the idea that it would be easy for children. It turned out not to be. So it turned out that we gave them the start of the sentences, and we were kind of looking at them. So we did it face to face, not in a survey. And we were like looking at them like, please complete the sentence. And they were just looking at us confused and be like, what do they want? Why don't they, you know, finish their sentence? So it didn't work in that experiment that we did. Didn't work very well. And they were like pre-teenagers. So like they were between 11 and 13 years old. So I would have expected actually that they were of the age of, you know, being able to do it, but it was not very successful. But it's just one experience. I haven't heard of anyone else using it on kids, and it's not documented in the literature either. So that might be something to try out if you're brave, and you can send me insights into what you collected. Do we have other questions? Not that I can see of. Before you go, if you're still brave enough, I have 3 last ones, you know, because we should practice what we preach. So the first one is what I like the most about this workshop is. The second one is what frustrated me the most about this workshop. And the third one is I envision myself using the method 4. And don't be shy. As a researcher, I'm very used to criticism, so I'm very happy to hear also all the things that went completely wrong. Thanks for the nice answer. And Claudia, this is okay. Sometimes, you know, babies need attention more than workshops. That's all fine. And Veronica, I think your answer is very valuable. It shows the power of collaboration. So Veronica says she's wondering why didn't I think of these stems when looking at the stems of other people. So the way I do it usually is that I organize a tiny brainstorm session with a couple of team members, and we brainstorm the sentence stems together. Because indeed, there are some people who just suddenly have a creative idea. And very often also when we say, okay, we want to brainstorm dimension of expectation, we tend to say expect, expect, expect in the sentence stem, probably also because we are not native speakers. So that's the tough part as well. But it really helps to have several people trying to brainstorm on the same dimension so that you get to have like, oh yeah, that one is way better than mine. And then you can pilot test more. So about the analysis and what to do with the data, yeah, we didn't have time to cover it today, but basically it is just qualitative data analysis. So there are three basic type of things that I personally would do with the data and that people do with the data. The first one is the one that I said earlier. The easier one is if you have an assumption, you just want to use the method to challenge your assumption. So let's say your product, you design a product to be playful. You want to verify if playfulness is perceived. Then it's very easy. You try to trigger just one word and you make like occurrences. So you just count the number of people who mentioned that dimension. You can also just categorize the answers by valence, whether they are positive, negative, or neutral. Again, it kind of gives you a feeling, but it's not very detailed. Whenever you want to have an actual insightful analysis, you might just need to do a kind of thematic qualitative analysis, just the way you would do with an interview. It is easier because here, as I said earlier, you don't have the noise. So you really just have the insight that is really on, spot on. And you also don't have all the, so if you conduct an interview, people are going to do digression. So they are going to talk about a topic and then something else and then go back to the previous topic. So it's harder in that sense. So you will save time, but there is no miracle solution to do that in a way. Some softwares, like at one point we were using a software that is not meant for qualitative data, but for quantitative data, we were using SPSS. And SPSS can count the number of, they can just count the number of similar answers. So you could quickly have a count of the most common answers. And the other way we've been doing it is sometimes we didn't analyze it. So sometimes we just printed out the answers just as quotes. And we were using them in co-creation sessions or ideation sessions, or to create an experience map or something. So we were using it as raw data to some extent without really analyzing it. So we were printing it out and then playing a bit with it and trying to cluster it. So you could also print it out and just do an affinity diagram, meaning that you are just clustering answers that look similar, and you do that literally by hand, and you don't have to use software for that. So yeah, just a couple of insights there. But as I said, that's the part where efficiency is slightly better than interview, but it's not the miracle. And that's also the reason why many people keep doing multiple choice surveys, and they are useful for many situations. And also, the analysis brings something also with those numbers, and you can do a lot of things with statistics. But to me, that's really a method that brings some insights with a low data collection effort and quite some engaging component for the users. And yeah, I think we have to wrap up. I'm looking at my co-organizers, my hosts.
Thank you very much, Carine. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And it's very wonderful to have you. And people are making comments saying it's very practical. And can we give her a clap? Just pushing on the icon, please. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much, Carine.
Thank you all of you for I know, it's never easy online, but you've been participating, and I could see all these answers in the chat. That's really encouraging as well when when giving a talk. That was really nice, and also very insightful, all the ideas that people have shared. So the good thing for me is that I'm also always learning from people and from, both their questions and the way they look at the method. So if some of you end up using the method intensively in the upcoming months, don't hesitate to drop me a line and to tell me what you've learned about it, because that might be something completely new that we scientists have missed out. So I'm also happy to hear about some follow-up feedback.
So can you share? I think there's a page that you have your book and also Twitter account. Can you share that slide? So if people want to contact you, Yeah, I think that's in the very beginning, the very first page of the slide, right? So in case
Wait.
the audience would like to contact you, they know how to ping you on Twitter or social media.
I'm trying to stop. Wait. I've lost my mouse control. Good that it happens at the end.
Oh, if not, it's okay. I will get your information, and if any of you wants to ping Carine, if you cannot find her contact information, please let me know. Oh yeah, here you go. That's the one.
Well, the easiest way is usually on Twitter, but I'm also on LinkedIn, and very easily, if you Google me, you will find my institutional university address. So, and also I think probably the event will be like the slides will be shared with the community, I guess. So I will add a slide with resources where people can find more information. Most of them are kind of scientific papers, but I think you can still extract quite some knowledge out of them.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yes. So we're going to share your slide if you send me a copy. Thank you. Wonderful. And also we record this meeting too. So we're going to post it on YouTube under the UXPA Seattle channel. So thank you so much for sharing your method with us.
You're welcome, and have a good, well, evening, everyone. And I'm going to go to sleep now. I will start my night.
Take care, Carine. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a good night.